Thank you. Well, we are at about 2 o'clock English time, UK time. And I think for those of us who are watching in the United States of America, if I've got my maths right, it's maybe about 9 o'clock in the morning for some of you. Wherever you are watching, whatever time frame you are watching in, you are very, very welcome to our afternoon. It is called Saving Beauty, Cultivating an Abundant Heart in a Time of Pandemic. In a moment or two, I'll say a quick word about Mark, who's kindly leading for us this afternoon. As for me, my name is Anthony, and I'm based in St. Michael at the Northgate Church here in Oxford in the UK. And it's a great delight and honour to welcome everybody. And for me and for St. Michael's to be part of the Oxford Centre for Spiritual Growth. One of the things we love is that so many different faces, different people are involved. And it's lovely to be sharing this afternoon with the support of the Oxford Quaker meeting. More of that in a moment. Just a word or two about the technicalities. Ian is our very kind Zoom verger this afternoon. If we have any queries, feel free to send to Ian or to myself a private chat, and we'll see what we can do to help. Apart from that, during the actual sessions, we won't be chatting about what we're hearing because there'll be time to do that in the plenary later. So please, if you could just use the chat for any Zoom technical issues, that would be great. A reminder, please, to keep our microphones turned off. That helps with feedback and so on. But if I may start with a quote that Mark gave me. I'm very conscious that when one introduces these things, one needs to be very brief. So I promise I won't be too long. But I love the fact that Mark Burrows kindly said that this day was inspired by Georgie Simpson's vision to have such a day on beauty. And then Mark says, which seems to be the way she inhabited her life and this world. So we continue to remember, to honour and to be thankful for Georgie. Word or two about Mark. I've had the privilege of getting to know Mark just a tiny bit through a couple of Zoom planning meetings. Loved our brief conversations and his sense of humour. I know we're in for a great afternoon. Some of you may know more about him academically than I did before I got involved. He's a PhD, a reverend, he's a poet, teacher and scholar. Greatly in demand internationally, retreat leader, speaker on matters of poetry and theology, spirituality and the arts, what's not to like. He's in particular, he's a leading interpreter and translator of Rilke's poetry, been involved in the Bonn Rilke project for the last decade, contributing to a new 3-volume edition of Rilke's Book of Hours. Performing this work in programs, blending meditations on these poems with original jazz music and photographic images. He is a poet, he's a writer, he's won prizes, so much stuff. Do look him up if you would like to. Now lives in Midcoast, Maine, in the US of A, having been for 10 years teaching in a university in Germany. I would like to finish my little welcome again by quoting Mark. As we will hear this afternoon, he does speak so well and write so well. He's been teaching theology and literature for the last 30 or so years. And then he says this: "My interest in poetry and spirituality has long animated my academic work and spilled out into the primary soul work of retreat leadership, where I find nourishment beyond what words can say. That I believe," says Mark, "beauty is stronger and truer and more enduring than the burden of ugliness, and that beauty has the power to save us by reminding us of who we are and what this world is about as a theatre of the often unhidden sacred." A prayer from me. Almighty God, we thank you that you are indeed a God of beauty. And we thank you for one another this afternoon, scattered across this earthly world, but united in your love and in your purposes for us. We pray for all those on our minds and hearts this day in any particular need. And we pray for our time this afternoon, that it would be time of blessing, of challenge, of healing, of comfort, and that your work would be done. Amen.
Amen.
Now it's my privilege to hand over to Ben Simpson, who has done so much to put this afternoon together. So enough from me. Welcome everybody, and over to you, kind Ben.
Good. I was going to say good afternoon, but for some of you it's good morning. But welcome everyone. I'm no longer anonymized by email or a face mask. So hello everyone. Georgie, my late wife, who died from an aggressive cancer last October, founded Oxford Centre for Spiritual Growth back in 2009 after some 20 years as a priest in parish ministry. During her ministry, Georgie organised some 85 lunchtime talks by distinguished and influential speakers. And since its inception, the Centre, OCSG, has organised over 100 reflective study days, quiet days, talks and seminars, linking spirituality with the arts and humanity and prayer. We aim to keep Georgie's flag flying. Today's event has been jointly organised, as you've heard, by OCSG and Oxford Quaker Meeting, and we're going to donate funds from the event's surplus to them in support of their initiative, Action on Poverty, about which, if she's with us now, Deb Arrowsmith, their manager, would like to say just a few words.
Yes, she's here, Ben. Well, it was the last time we met together with Georgie and Ben and Mark was in Oxford Quaker Meeting, and we really hope that we can get back there all together again soon. And this time, as you've heard, Ben has generously decided to donate part of the proceeds to our little charity, which is Oxford Friends Action on Poverty. And you can find more details about that on the Oxford Quaker website, oxfordquakers.org. It's a disgrace, frankly, that there is poverty in our wealthy city and indeed in our country, but there is, and there will be a strong and increasing need for support. And Oxfam as a Quaker charity is as ever practical, and it provides very small grants, but an awful lot of them. It might be a bicycle for somebody who's newly got a job, or it might be providing household goods for somebody who has entered settled accommodation for the first time. So anything you can donate will make a real lasting difference in people's lives. And quite frankly, that has to be a thing of beauty. So thank you.
I think I was going to eulogize about Mark, but Anthony has done this so well, I will cut to the quick and get on and say just that following that meeting 2 years ago at the glorious Quaker Meeting House and its garden. We're in for a treat today, and I'll welcome Mark and let him give us that treat. So Mark, thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben and Anthony and Deb, for this warm welcome. And I too find myself drawn to the presence of Georgie even today with us. She longed to have this day happen. And in some ways, her presence is a presence of, as Plato put it, giving birth in beauty. So may our day be a day when we birth beauty in this world, which is full of beauty and tarnished with enough ugliness to give us work to do and joy in the doing. So a warm welcome to you all from Camden, Maine, a Camden on this side of the waters. It's morning here, a glorious morning after 2 long days of steady rains, which our gardens and lawns and fields desperately needed. So I'm delighted to be with you to welcome you to this day. There will be 2 talks, as you know, the first one beginning now, and the second one at 4:45 British summertime until 6 British summertime. In between, immediately following this talk, there will be a time for conversation with small groups. And then we've planned an hour and 15 minutes for you to take a walk, to have a cup of tea, to ground yourself in the vision of beauty that we will cultivate here together this day. So I'm very delighted to be with you and wish us all blessings in this adventure of discovery. So I'd like to begin this morning's talk, this afternoon's talk, on the topic, with the title, Beautifying Our Gaze. And what I hope we'll discover today is a way to think about beauty in a much deeper way than one often imagines in the kind of media blitz of how we're presented with a kind of perfect beauty, an idealized beauty that's far from our reach and indeed is irrelevant to the deeper issue of living faithfully in these times. And what this day really is about, I hope, is about cultivating what I think of as an abundance of the heart. It was St. Augustine who famously wrote in his Confessions, "It is in my heart that I am whatever I am." That the heart in our long Western tradition has long been seen as the cradle of what it is to be who we are. To be persons who image the sacred, who image the divine, who seek to find that image of the divine in those around us, those we enjoy and those we struggle with, our friends and indeed our enemies. And to trust that this divine imprint is there everywhere if we cultivate eyes to see it. And so our first work always in our lives is remembering that we are called, invited to beautify our gaze, to beautify the way that we behold the world in which we live. Now, there's no better way, perhaps, on a day like this, at least here in the States, a beautiful, beautiful May day after these long rains. I'm looking out my window into my gardens with the trees, the flowering trees bursting with flowers, with the clouds drifting lazily across the horizon, and with the sound of the ocean, even within hearing from where I'm sitting right now. Many of you will know Philip Larkin's celebrated poem, The Trees, a somewhat unusual poem for Larkin if you know his larger body of work. The trees are coming into leaf like something almost being said. The recent buds relax and spread. Their greenness is a kind of grief. Is it that they are born again and we grow old? No, they die too. Their yearly trick of looking new is written down in rings of grain. But still the unresting castles thresh in full-grown thickness every May. Last year is dead, they seem to say. Begin afresh, afresh, afresh. Let's hear a reading and a short animation of this wonderful poem.
The trees. The trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. The recent buds relax and spread. Their greenness is a kind of grief. Is it that they are born again and we grow old? No, they die too. Their yearly trick of looking new is written down in rings of grain. Yet still the unresting castles thresh in full-grown thickness every May. Last year is dead, they seem to say. Begin afresh, afresh, afresh.
A wonderful poem and a poem for this day. Let's move to Denise Levertov, born in the UK, homeschooled at a time that was somewhat unusual. Her father, a Jewish convert to Christianity, became a priest. And she wandered to the United States as a young woman, became one of our celebrated poets, an activist in the 1960s. She went from the East Coast, where she taught for many years in Boston, near Boston, to the West Coast, where she spent the bulk of her adult life, eventually entering the Roman Catholic Church in the last decade of her life. One of her last poems from a marvelous collection called This Great Unknowing, she writes this: all which, because it was flame and song and granted us joy, we thought we'd do, be, revisit, turns out to have been what it was that once only. Every initiation did not begin a series, a buildup. The marvelous did happen in our lives. Our stories are not drab with its absence, but don't expect now to return for more. Whatever more there will be unique, as those were unique. Try to acknowledge the next song in its body halo of flames as utterly present, as now or never. When I first read this poem some 20 years ago, I found it riveting. A reminder that the gift of our life is in part its transience, its ephemeral nature, that it passes from moment to moment, from life into death. And yet each moment holds the marvelous. In potentia, as the medieval scholastics would have put it, in its possibilities, in its powerful possibilities. And I'm not sure what a song in its body halo of flames exactly is. Isn't it a marvelous metaphor? But Denise Levertov is inviting us to imagine that each moment offers us an opening into the marvel of this life, into the mystery of this life, the deepest mystery that there is life itself, and that we're given consciousness, awareness, to reveal, let it reveal itself to us and in us and through us. And so let's begin with this marvelous image of what it is to expect the marvelous, even today, even now. But a day like this about beauty from the very outset is challenged with the question, what is beauty? What is beauty? One of my favorite poets, an American, Native American poet from the Chickasaw tribe in Colorado, Linda Hogan, put it this way in a poem called The Way In. Sometimes the way to milk and honey is through the body. A marvelous image. Milk and honey, that ancient metaphor of the gift of God, of land and place for a wandering pilgrim people, a land flowing with milk and honey. Sometimes the way to milk and honey is through the body. Sometimes the way in is a song. But there are three ways in the world: dangerous, wounding, and beauty. A marvelous moment. Three ways in the world: vulnerability, the risk that living is, and the possibility that we can hurt others and do, just as we ourselves are hurt. And beauty. And beauty. Three ways in the world. To enter stone, be water. To rise through hard earth, be plant, desiring sunlight, believing in water. To enter fire, be dry. To enter life, be food. What a marvelous collection of images. And these strange contrasts, stone and water, hard earth with a plant bursting toward the sun, believing in water. To enter fire, be dry. To enter life, be food. All ways of beauty in and through our bodies, in and through our singing. Well, I'd like to begin this talk, and we'll come back to this through the day, to recall perhaps from me, to my mind, one of the most remarkable visions of beauty in ancient literature. And it comes from Plato's great dialogue called the Symposium, a gathering of men to discuss with each other what love was. And those of you who know this dialogue will remember that the last person to enter, well, almost the last person, at the very end of this long discussion, this debate about love, a woman makes her appearance, a philosopher named Diotima. And she is given the final word because Socrates admits that whatever he knows about love, he learned from her. And in those stirring words of her speech to these men, she describes love not as wanting to possess the good forever, but as giving birth in beauty. And that image that our life is the occasion, the possibility to give birth in beauty, whether in body or in soul, she said, becomes a kind of anchor, to my mind, for the way at our best in the long tradition of Western philosophy and theology we have moved forward into the question both of love and of beauty. And as she put it there, all of us are pregnant, Socrates, both in body and in soul. And as soon as we come to a certain age, we naturally desire to give birth. Now, no one can possibly give birth in anything ugly, only in something beautiful. I hope this day will be the occasion for us to imagine, not in a general sense, but in terms of your own life, how this invitation, this reminder, this evocative call might become real. To realize that your life is the occasion to give birth in beauty, and that your deepest desire is not to find the beautiful for yourself and hold on to it, but to birth beauty into this world. Now, following from Socrates' vision from this ancient Platonic dialogue, a later Platonist named Plotinus also wrote longingly, I would say, about beauty, at one point saying, "This is the spirit that beauty must ever induce, wonderment, and a delicious trouble, longing, and love, and a trembling that is all delight." What a marvelous addition to this vision of Socrates or of Diotima, that beauty induces not simply wonderment, but something that troubles us, that disturbs us, that evokes a longing in us and a trembling in us that is all delight. Aquinas takes this theme a step further and simply says beauty is that which being seen pleases us. Beauty does something within us. It's not something outside of us. Beauty is what we come to know in an experience that we feel, in something that moves us, that causes a trembling in us, that is all delight. And in a somewhat more banal version, in Webster's most recent dictionary, the quality or aggregate of qualities in a person or thing that gives pleasure to the senses or pleasurably exalts the mind or spirit. But what you see in all of these is that beauty is something that happens in us. It exalts the mind. It causes a trembling in us. It pleases us. Well, the great Portuguese poet, Fernando Pessoa, in one of his playful poems attributed to the keeper of sheep, simply put it this way: beauty is the name of something that doesn't exist, but that I give to things in exchange for the pleasure they give me. And here we find ourselves in a very modern posture, no longer presuming to describe, as Aristotle had done, as Aquinas did, echoing Aristotle, what the attributes of beauty are in things around us: proportionality, harmony, radiance, these dimensions of something outside of us. No, Pessoa speaks in an idiom closer to our own in saying that beauty isn't something outside of us. It's not something that exists. It's something we name because of the pleasure they give us. Well, we could spend the entire day with Keats. And two brief excerpts from his great poem, Endymion. The very beginning: a thing of beauty is a joy forever. You know that. It's become almost a cliche, hasn't it? Everyone has heard that at some point, even though most would not be able to say, well, that was John Keats, in this short bursting flame of life who brought this image into our common idiom. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. And it's that foreverness that I want to dwell upon in a moment. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Therefore, on every morrow, are we wreathing a flowery band to bind us to the earth, in spite of despondence, of the inhuman dearth of noble natures, of the gloomy days, of all the unhealthy and or darkened ways made for our searching. Yes, in spite of all, some shape of beauty moves away the pall from our dark spirits. Beauty touches us in an abiding way. It resists the changeability, the transience of life, although it finds expression in those moments that we cannot hold on to, that are once only, as Levertov put it. A little later, he goes on, nor do we merely feel these essences for one short hour. No, even as the trees that whisper around a temple become soon dear as a temple's self, so does the moon, the passion poesy, glories infinite, haunt us till we become a cheering light unto our souls and bound to us so fast that whether there be shine or gloom or cast, they must always be with us or we die. Wallace Stevens put it this way in one of his last poems published posthumously: we live in a constellation of patches and of pitches, not in a single world. Such a reminder of where we find ourselves, not in a perfect world, not in an ideal world. No, we live in a world, in a constellation of patches and of pitches, in things said well in music, on the piano, and in speech, as in a page of poetry. Thinkers without final thoughts in an always incipient cosmos. The way when we climb a mountain, Vermont throws itself together. A strange poem. And I won't say too much about it, just to say that the poem reminds us that beauty is not some ideal that we can hold on to forever, that we're always beginning again with it. The way when we climb a mountain, Vermont, the state of Vermont, throws itself together, gathers it around us. It's in the going forth, it's in the singing of music, it's in the playing of music, it's in the writing of speech, as in a page of poetry, that we find our way into a deeper sense of beauty. But I wonder what beauty is for you. Let's take a moment. If you have a sheet of paper nearby, just write down the first few things that come to your mind. If I asked you, and we're sitting in a room, to write down what is beauty for you, how would you describe it? What would you say? Take just a moment. Would it be a description of an experience? Would it be an abstract formulation? Something like a dictionary description? Or would it be something you experienced, some moment that touched you, where you felt your aliveness with a special urgency and perhaps even delight? Just hold on to that, because in the discussion group, I'm going to ask you to begin by sharing with each other your sense of what beauty is. And for the remainder of my talk, I'd like to reflect with you on how we behold beauty, because it is, in one sense, not something outside of us. That's the way we commonly think of it. Beauty is something we look at. No, beauty has to do, I would say, with the way that we give birth, the way that we birth something into the world, the way that we beautify our way of seeing. The graced eye can glimpse beauty anywhere, writes John O'Donohue. For beauty does not reserve itself for special elite moments or instances. It does not wait for perfection, but is present already secretly in everything. When we beautify our gaze, the grace of hidden beauty becomes our joy and our sanctuary. It's that thought that I'd like to linger over for the remainder of this talk. When we beautify our gaze, how do we do that? How do we beautify the way we look? I came of age in the 1960s when there was a movement in our society that went by the slogan, "Black is beautiful." It was the first kind of public outcry against the tyranny of slavery, of racism, of white fear and hatred toward persons of color. And it lived most of all within the African American community, but in the 60s it began to spill out and to become a way that others who weren't part of that community were able to see the gift that people of color were in this world. And we'll come back to that theme through the lens of poems of those of African descent throughout the day. But I'd like to pause for a moment and to allow young people around the world. There was a video produced some years ago where young people were simply asked the question, what is beauty? And you'll find many cliches here, which is a reminder that there is so much work to do in the way that we cultivate what it is that we experience and share with others as beauty. And there is wisdom as well to be heard. Let's take a listen.
When I say beauty, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
คำว่าสวยเหรอคะ
美しい
Beauty, elegance came to my mind.
Élégance. On n'est pas forcément beau quand on est élégant, mais on dégage quelque chose qui est beaucoup plus important que d'être beau, c'est une attitude.
beautiful
ከውስጥ የሚገኝ ነገር ነው ውበት ማለት
paz interior
The environment.
Why did you say environment?
Someplace different because here it's too much hot.
If you ask me, like, what's the sexy thing about a person? It's his or her intelligence.
Donne, perché so, quando si dice bellezza la prima cosa che mi viene in mente sono le donne. Qualunque cosa gira intorno alla bellezza della donna praticamente.
What makes a woman beautiful?
Pour moi, c'est quand on ne sait pas qu'on est beau, qu'on est joli, ou c'est quand on peut se sentir bien et qu'on est extrêmement naturel.
Not forced, not like done up hair, makeup, fake boobs.
其实我觉得女人的话应该是自然美最好，但是现在我觉得在中国吧，就越来越多的女孩开始整容，但是其实我个人感觉她们真人看上去非常的假，
The Australians think of it in much the same way as Americans do. Women that are tall and flawless, a size 6, heavy-chested.
因为在传统中国审美中，认为就是大眼睛、浓眉毛和高鼻梁，还有尖下巴会是一个很好看，会是一个很好看的女孩子的样子。
เหมือนมันไม่ได้ขึ้นอยู่กับสเตอริโอไทป์ใดๆเช่นขณะนี้กระแสว่าคนนี้ต้องขาวคนนี้เลยสวย
En Colombia, desafortunadamente, lo que tiende a ser una mujer bonita es que tenga unas tetas grandes y un culo grande.
What makes a man be considered beautiful?
तो हिंदुस्तान में अगर आदमी को बोलो कि सुंदर है तो वो बहुत ऑफेंड हो जाते हैं
我喜欢那种就有肌肉的猛男型，然后很多人
De naturel, qui se regarde pas en fait, qui sait pas forcément qu'il est beau.
上海男生其实他具备了南方男生的一个特点，他会比较细心顾家，然后很多上海男生还会做菜。
A man who knows how to tend to his family and to the wife and knows how to talk to the people, to the society, gives charity.
その人にやっぱりそのストーリーがあったり、その背景があることがでそれに向かって追求していってたりとか、なんかそういう儚さがあったりっていうのがその人の美しさが合計にこう一つにあって美しいって思うことがあるんじゃないかな。
Weil ich das so sehe, weil ich der Meinung bin, also Schönheit liegt immer im Auge des Betrachters and it's in the eye of the beholder. Und es kann halt einfach sein, ein Moment, ein schöner Augenblick, den man halt einfach, das war pure Schönheit. Oder aber auch natürlich die Äußerlichkeiten. Aber die sind halt für jeden ja subjektiv und individuell.
There it is. What a blend of different images, some very tender, some quite full of cliche, almost offensive, I would say. And yet, in the midst of all of that, you could feel both of the pressures of beauty as something outside of us, perfection, or beauty as a way we create love in the world, the way we care for each other, the way we open ourselves to the gift of our own life and of the lives of others around us. Well, there are so many ways to think about beauty, and I'd like to call in the last 20 minutes of this talk on a number of poets to help us find our way. First of all, from the poet Wendell Berry, an American farmer poet, grew up on a small Kentucky farm that had been in his family for more than 2 centuries. Went to New York and made his fame as a poet in the 1960s and realized that he was losing his soul there in the hardened streets of New York and went back to Kentucky and spent the last 50 years working the land in an old-fashioned way, caring for the farms, the small farms that used to be the very backbone of our society. I would say the same could be said about the UK. And thinking about the environment and the precarious situation we find ourselves in. One of the leading spokespersons of the environmental movement in our day. In one of his wonderful poems, without a title, in a collection called Given, he put it this way. The yellow-throated warbler, here's a picture of the yellow-throated warbler, which you may not have seen. The yellow-throated warbler, the highest, remotest voice of this place, sings in the tops of the tallest sycamores. But one day he came twice to the railing of my porch where I sat at work above the river. He was too close to see with binoculars. Only the naked eye could take him in, a bird more beautiful than every picture of himself, more beautiful than himself killed and preserved by the most skilled taxidermist, more beautiful than any human mind, so small and inexact, could ever hope to remember. My mind became beautiful by the sight of him. He had the beauty only of himself, alive in the only moment of his life. He had upon him like a light the whole beauty of the living world that never dies. That's magnificent, isn't it? Our mind becomes beautiful by the way we open ourselves to the gift of this earth, of its creatures, of its moments of radiance, of light, shining in the most ordinary of things. And as we open our lives to the beauty that is always, not simply around us, but that lives in us and through us, as it does live in and through a little creature like a yellow-throated warbler, then we begin to discover a beauty more whole, more enduring, more sacred than any cliche could ever grasp. As we begin to beautify the way we gaze and open ourselves to this world of hope, something significant begins to shift within our soul, within our heart. More beautiful than our minds, so small and inexact, could ever hope to remember. Another of our great poets, W.S. Merwin, whose death in 2019 was such a loss. In the last book of his poems he dictated to his wife, Paula, because by that point he had lost his eyesight, called, well, how would you pronounce this title? And it's the ambivalence of this word that is the hinge that makes this poem so great. What is the present here? As they were leaving the garden, and let me simply say in advance, this is a kind of image of the ancient creation story of Adam and Eve being fashioned in this garden and eventually excluded from it, banished from it. And here, in something like a kind of modern secular midrash, Merwin goes back to this story and remembers it in his own way. As they were leaving the garden, one of the angels bent down to them and whispered, I am to give you this as you are leaving the garden. I do not know what it is or what it is for, what you will do with it. You will not be able to keep it, but you will not be able to keep anything. Yet they both reached at once for the present. When their hands met, they laughed. Isn't that stunning? When they both reached at once for the present. And what is the poet saying here? Of course, he's not going to tell us what he's saying. The marvelous ambiguity of the word present, the present moment, which is the greatest present you have and I have. And in being banished from that place of union, as it were, in Merwin's telling of the story, one of the angels whispers this gift You'll not be able to keep it, but you'll not be able to keep anything. And yet this present is what calls us to reach toward each other. And when we reach, and when our hands, perhaps in an unlikely moment, touch, it brings laughter to our hearts. It stirs something deep in our soul. This communion, east of Eden, is what we're made to find again and again and again, and to treasure it in a world that is bereft of this present, that often refuses this community, this touching across the distances, this gift of life. One of my great discoveries in the last years has been to find my way to the writings of Kai Miller, who will probably be known to many of you in the UK. He's hardly known in the United States, although I'm doing what I can to change that. A remarkable writer from Jamaica, came to the UK for studies, eventually completing his doctorate in Glasgow. He's a writer of stories, of legends, a book of prophecies, and collections of poetry that will simply knock you over with insight. And here's one from his most recent collection, In Nearby Bushes, entitled, These Things I Know as Much as You. These things I know as much as you. While morning comes, that slow brightening of sky, the world revealing itself as outline, the shape of roofs, and birds that oar themselves across the high pink sea. The day that does not yet smell of day. The here that could be anywhere and every place. It is possible in that 3-day world to ignore the specifics, the names of birds or places, the specifics of roofs, to simply be in the world, wrapped by an unbothered sky. To simply be in the world, wrapped by an unbothered sky. To simply be. To simply be. If there is a beginning point, not of thinking about beauty, but of experiencing beauty, it will come to us in those moments when we somehow remember the greatest possibility that's given to us when we are made, fashioned, is the gift of simply being. And as we live into that gift, to realize that this is the same gift that each creature, each human being who inhabits this earth with us, in our communities, in our nations, and across this world, that each one of us is given this first invitation again and again to remember the gift of simply being. and opening ourselves to that gift in others and enabling that to be true for them as for us. It's funny that the Australian cartoonist, Michael Leunig, he just goes by Leunig, one of the great prophets, I would say, in this strange genre of the cartoon of our time. Here's one of his that I love. What are you doing? I'm using my device. What's your device? Oh, my device is the sky. Does your device have many applications? Yes, it has sun, moon, clouds, and birds. Do you have to recharge your device very often? I don't ever have to recharge my device. It recharges me. That's where Kai Miller ends. To simply be in the world wrapped by an unbothered sky, to let the earth around us, this theater of often unhidden miracles, lift us beyond our existence with something edging on transcendence. Well, this is the view I had this morning when I went down to the sea, 100 yards from where I'm sitting now. And this is the morning sunrise over the Atlantic, looking toward Britain, unimaginably far away. Perhaps the most familiar poet of our day in the United States, Mary Oliver, also died in 2019, put it in one of her great poems, To Go Down to the Sea. Let's see how she put it. I go down to the shore in the morning, and depending on the hour, the waves are rolling in or moving out. And I say, oh, I'm miserable. What should I do? And the sea says in its lovely voice, excuse me, I have work to do. Excuse me, I have work to do. And don't you? And don't I too? The waves will roll in, they'll move out, and our misery, very real as it is from time to time, season to season, is true. But it's not the only truth about who we are. And it is that longer truth, that deeper truth, that the sea reminds us of, to flow in and out, to rise and swell and fall back again, and to be as persistent as birdsong in the spring and the sound of the winds over the moors on a May morning. Well, I'd like to close this first session with a poem I wrote some years ago, inspired by the writings of Meister Eckhart, the medieval theologian, the Dominican theologian, born around 1260 and died probably in 1328. He was a radical thinker. He was, well, we call him a mystic. He would have simply said, I'm alive to the reality of God, which is mystery in the most ordinary of things. Well, let this be a poem to carry us into the discussions, into our discussion groups. A poem I simply entitled The All of Ever Only Love. These are not Eckhart's words, but it's a poem built from texts from the sermons mostly of Eckhart. The All of Ever Only Love. We name the world of things and feelings, of this and of that, of yes and of no, of dark and of light. That's we're namers, right? In the story of creation, this is the task that in this ancient mythic telling of the story, what is the one thing God charges us to do is to name the creatures, to name the experiences of our lives. We do it instinctively. We do it without being told we must. We name the world of things and feelings, of this and of that, of yes and of no, of dark and of light. And in all this, turn from the source of our being, which has no name we can know, and is beyond every feeling, and cannot be other than yes. And that's perhaps the heart of this poem. The source of our being cannot be other than yes. When I give myself to the inflow of me into you, I find that this origin is the way, and this way is the end, and this end is the all ever only love. How do we beautify our gaze? We turn toward the source of our being, which has no name we can know, and is beyond every feeling, and cannot be other than yes. We'll pause now. Ian will direct you into a discussion group. And if you've not done this before, take a moment or two to accept the invitation. And you'll find yourself then with 3 other people. And I'd like you to begin. You have a half an hour. You can extend it a little if you'd like. I'd like you to begin your conversation by sharing what you wrote earlier this afternoon in the session. What is beauty for you? What touches you when you hear the word beauty? And see where the conversation goes from there. At the end of the discussion group, we'll have a spacious 75 minutes to take a break, to wander, if you can, to a quiet place outside or find a quiet place. Simply gather your thoughts, to journal, to reflect, to give yourself the gift of this day. And I'll see you again for the final talk at 4:45 British summertime, 11:45 here on the East Coast of the US. Thanks. Well, shall we begin again? Thank you, Anthony, for bringing us back together. I do hope you had a spacious time, both in your discussions, your discussion group, but also the hour and 15 or 20 minutes given to simply give us all space to wander and wonder and to gather our thoughts, our feelings, our reflections as this retreat day continues. It's been a joy to share this time. I only wish we were sitting together so that we had a chance for exchange with each other, that I could hear your voices and see your faces other than the little squares on the screen. But I'm so grateful that we're able, through this technology, to gather such a wide group of people from various parts of the UK who might not have made it to Oxford today, and certainly from those in the US, and we have a few, I think, from Australia, who are now in the middle of the night but are with us as well. What a miracle this technology really is. One of the poets who's been a guiding presence in my life, we heard a short poem, a late poem of his earlier, a man named Wallace Stevens. He was one of the most distinguished poets of his generation. He died in 1955. He won every prize worth winning, the big prizes in the United States, the National Book Award, the Pulitzer, and so on. His day job was as a lawyer. He worked as an executive in an insurance, a large insurance company in Hartford, Connecticut. Hardly a place you'd expect to find a poet. And I recall a story told about a young clerk who was just learning the trade, and he happened to find himself in the morning in the elevator going up with Mr. Stevens to the offices where Stevens worked. And the young man was very embarrassed and somewhat shy. And finally he blurted out, "Mr. Stevens, I've tried to read your poems, but I don't understand them." And Stevens, without batting an eye, looked at him. He said, "Whoever said you were supposed to understand them?" Now, Stevens was playing with us a little bit, because clearly there is a kind of understanding that happens with poems, with with the strong poems, with the sturdy poems, with the saving poems, that grows on us as we grow. And I would say those poems grow us. They widen our apprehensions. They deepen our sensibilities. They awaken things in us that were always there, but needed to be activated. Stevens once said that poetry is the imagination of life. And in the a prose book that he wrote later in his life called The Necessary Angel, he talked about the experience that happens to all of us when we look at the blue sky for the first time. I'm quoting him now. That is to say, not merely see it, but look at it and experience it. And for the first time, have a sense that we live in the center of a physical geography, a physical poetry, a geography that would be intolerable except for the non-geography that exists there. We live in the center of a physical poetry, a geography that would be intolerable except for the non-geography that lives there. And it's that non-geography, that transcendent or transcending dimension that deepens our senses, our sensibilities, that awakens something latent, always latent within us, and often turns us more fully toward the world around us, toward the world within us, and toward those with whom we share this life. I hope that this day will be spacious enough to offer all of us moments like that as we continue. And so my final talk is simply entitled A Radiance That Saves. A Radiance That Saves. I remember reading James Joyce's The Portrait of an Artist as a young man. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the book. Perhaps you read it earlier in your life. And there's a particular moment in the book, later in the book, where Stephen Dedalus is describing what art is and what beauty is. And he quotes a line from Aquinas, which Aquinas had borrowed from Aristotle in Latin to describe what beauty is. And the word that he uses to describe radiance well, let's say the word claritas, he translates as radiance. And radiance is such a powerful word because the word radiate to something that radiates, it's an inner light, right? It's not a light that comes to us from outside only, but it's also a light that we experience within. And it's that sense of radiance that I'd like to explore with you for this final hour together. A radiance that saves. And the very title of this retreat, Saving Beauty, is a phrase that could be also read in two ways. Are we here to save beauty? To rescue beauty from the ugliness that's too much part of our lives? Well, perhaps. But there's also a sense in which beauty saves us. Well, the way that we learn to, as I put it, to beautify our life, to beautify the way we see. And it comes back to that ancient dialogue of Plato's, with which we began earlier today, where this invited guest, this woman invited unpredictably to this gathering of men, Diotima, has the final word to describe what love is. And she describes love as creating, begetting in beauty. This is a sense of radiance that we're going to explore in this last hour together. And who better to help us get started in this than Mary Oliver? When I am among the trees. I'll read it first, and then we'll hear Mary Oliver in her very distinctive voice read it for us. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. What a phrase. The trees give off hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself. I don't know that there's a better confession of sin if you're in churches that still have such a thing. If you attend a church where there is a time to examine ourselves, to collect ourselves, well, I think this says it as well as any ancient language could, that our stumbling is often that we are so distant from the hope of ourselves. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches. They call again. "It's simple," they say. And you too have come into this world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, to shine. Let's hear Mary Oliver read this poem.
I want to, this is a poem from an older book, and I don't know what book it is, but it doesn't really matter. When I am among the trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again, It's simple, they say, and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine.
Oh, I'm trying to. Can you see the screen? Somebody can let me know.
Yep, we can see the screen. Now got a picture of R.S. Thomas.
Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll continue. R.S. Thomas, two poems, both of which are entitled Gift. Many of you in the UK will know R.S. Thomas, a Welshman, a priest, the Church of Wales, a brooding voice whose moments of radiance are so stunning when they come in his poems, amid all of the long poems of melancholy and despondence, that we realize something extraordinary is happening as we encounter them. This is one of those poems called Gift. Some ask the world and are diminished in the receiving of it. You gave me only this small pool, but the more I drink from, the more overflows me with sourceless light. It's a magnificent poem. One to set on your bedstand or put on the mirror in your bathroom or on your refrigerator, someplace where you'll see it. Some ask the world and are diminished in the receiving of it. You gave me only this small pool, but the more I drink from, the more overflows me with sourceless light, with radiance. Radiance that comes as a gift to us. It's always there. The gift is always being offered. Yet ours is the work of receiving it, of opening ourselves to let that light overflow in that little pool. And here from Mary Oliver, the gift. Be still, my soul, and steadfast. Earth and heaven both are still watching, though time is draining from the clock, and your walk that was confident and quick has become slow. So be slow if you must, but let the heart still play its true part. Love still as once you loved, deeply and without patience. Let God and the world know you are grateful that the gift has been given, that the gift has been given. One might say just as truly that the gift has been received, that you have received a gift that was only yours to receive, only yours now to give. A month ago, we lost one of the great poets of our time. A kind of disciple of the great Polish poet Czesław Miłosz, a poet from Krakow in Poland, a poet who, like Miłosz, wandered away from Poland, who struggled against the communists and eventually was allowed to leave without the chance of returning for many years. He spent much of his life wandering back and forth between the United States, where he taught at the University of Houston and at the University of Chicago, and his beloved Paris. And at the end, the last years of his life, returned to Poland. He died in March of this year. I heard an interview with him sometime before his death. He said there are two kinds of poets. There are rebels and there are praisers. He said, I spent the first part of my life as a rebel. And then I discovered that my true vocation was to be a praiser, one who praises. I thought that was a beautiful description, a marvelous description. Both are so necessary. We need rebels and we need praisers. And what a gift when a rebel becomes a praiser, or when a praiser becomes a rebel. This is one of my most cherished poems of his, Poetry Searches for Radiance, in his book, Eternal Enemies. Poetry searches for radiance. Poetry is the kingly road that leads us farthest. We seek radiance in a gray hour, at noon, or in the chimneys of the dawn, even on a bus in November, while an old priest nods beside us. The waiter in a Chinese restaurant bursts into tears, and no one can think why. Who knows? This may also be a quest, like that moment at the seashore, when a predatory ship appeared on the horizon and stopped short, held still for a long while. Oh, these are all metaphors, aren't they beautiful? Ways of imagining not simply the world around us, but the inner world we always carry in our hearts. And also moments of deep joy and countless moments of anxiety. Let me see, I ask. Let me persist, I say. A cold rain falls at night. In the streets and avenues of my city, quiet darkness is hard at work. Poetry searches for radiance. I love this poem. I love it for so many reasons, for its honesty and its authenticity, for its moments of humor and tenderness, for its persistence in helping us remember that the darkness of our life is not the end, but the place, well, not where radiance always comes forth, but where we seek radiance, where we seek light, where we hope for something beyond clouded shadows of our own anxiety and fear. Cold rain falls at night. In the streets and avenues of my city, quiet darkness is hard at work. Poetry searches for radiance. In that sense, to my mind, the Gospels themselves are poems written in story form. They're poems that describe the coming of hope into a world burdened with despair, of glimpses of a light that the darkness cannot overcome. As John sings in the opening lines of his gospel. And in this season of Eastertide, we ourselves are gathered in the memory the witness that love bursts the bonds of the grave and is stronger than death. So we find ourselves in these weeks of Eastertide invited with the poet to search for the radiance of God. It shines out of the darkness, as St. Paul startlingly put it in his second letter to the Corinthians. Not that the light shines into the darkness, that the light illumines the darkness. No, the light shines out of the darkness, Paul wrote. That's the image of Christ that Paul continued to speak of, to bear witness to sing of in his letters. Well, you're getting two of my favorite poems right in a row. This one by Zagajewski, and this one, a poem written 50 years ago by the great American poet A.R. Ammons, called The City Limits. And I love that, again, an ambivalent title, because it could be read two ways, couldn't it? I don't know how in the UK you talk about the edge of a city. Do you say city limits? Do you say city limits? You get to the city limits? Well, surely that, but also the city can limit. It can limit us by the press of noise, by the press of distress, by the press of anxiety. And of course, that's not all that the city does. Well, here's a poem where Ammons opens up what it means to be living in this search for radiance. When you consider the radiance, isn't that a marvelous first line? When you consider the radiance, not when you see it, not when you demand it, but when you consider it. It's already there somehow. You've seen it before. He's drawing on that experience. He's not telling you something new. He's inviting you to reflect upon what you already know. When you consider the radiance, that it does not withhold itself, but pours its abundance without selection into every nook and cranny not overhung or hidden. When you consider that birds' bones make no awful noise against the light, but lie low in the light as in a high testimony. When you consider the radiance, that it will look into the guiltiest swervings of the weaving heart and bear itself upon them. Are there better lines in poetry than this? That the radiance will look into the guiltiest swervings of your weaving heart and mine and bear itself upon them, not flinching into disguise or darkening. When you consider the abundance of such resource as illuminates the glow blue bodies and gold stained wings of flies, swarming the dumped guts of a natural slaughter or the coil of shit, and in no way winces from its storms of generosity. That's a remarkable moment, right? When you consider the abundance of such resource, the radiance, as illuminates the glow blue bodies and gold stained wings of flies, swarming the dumped guts of a natural slaughter or the coil of shit, and in no way winces from its storms of generosity. When you consider that air or vacuum, snow or shale, squid or wolf, rose or lichen, each is accepted into as much light as it will take. Oh. Each is accepted into as much light as it will take. Then the heart moves roomier. The man stands, the woman stands and looks about. The leaf does not increase itself above the grass, and the dark work of the deepest cells is of a tune with May bushes, and fear, lit by the breath of such, calmly turns to praise. Stunning. One could describe the call to be human in many ways. One could begin to tease out what the ancient writers understood as resurrection in many ways. And at the heart of all of those wonderings and musings is a sense that there is a radiance given to each of us. And our work is to accept as much light as we can so that our heart might move roomier. And we stand and look about. The leaf does not increase itself above the grass, and the dark work of the deepest cells is of a tune with May bushes. And fear, lit by the breath of such, calmly turns to praise. This is a great poem. It's one of those that will endure for hundreds of years. People will look back and be reading this poem with whatever dialect and version of English we've coined by then. And they'll say, that is a poem to carry us home to who we are, to what we can become. Well, from the eloquent and poetic style to the eloquence of a cartoon again, Lunig, what's the use of this little hand? What's the use of this little eye? What's the use of this little mouth when all the world is broken? Make a cake with this little hand. Make a tear with this little eye. Make a word with this little mouth when all the world is broken. That's indeed what we're thinking of together today. Not how we can become beautiful, but how we can see that within our hands, within our eyes, within our mouths, within that little orbit of our influence, we have the capacity to beautify this broken world, to sing its praises, despite all the evidence to the contrary, despite the weight of discouragement that we each face daily in our lives, despite the despair that often seems to lurk around every corner in our goings. What else can we do but praise and praise and praise? Yes, in the midst of this brokenness and our own brokenness. As Leonard Cohen put it, there's a crack in everything in the world, in your life and in mine. It's how the light gets in. Well, I'd like to hear the poet Wendell Berry read the piece of Wild Things I understand we had no audio the last time. I'm hoping that we can hear the audio. This is his voice reading with an animation of the poem. Ian?
The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water. The peace of wild things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
I hope you could see and hear that poem. Something of a classic, I think, in our North American idiom, poetic idiom. And there is something about the peace of wild things, its energies, its authenticity, that awakens us when we have found our lives to be simply matters of turbulence and distress. We'll come to a poet in a moment, poet named William Bronck, an American poet, too little known, I'm afraid. And this painting was not inspired by the poem or the poem by the painting, but it's an image that he draws upon in the poem of a person sitting by a window with the green world behind. Here then the poet by William Bronck, the poem by William Bronck called Midsummer. A green world, a scene of green, deep with light blues, the greens made deep by those blues. One thinks how in certain pictures, envied landscapes are seen through a window maybe, far behind the serene sitter's face, the serene pose, as though in some impossible mirror, face to back, human serenity gazed at a green world which gazed at this face. A remarkable image. And this painting captured it so well. Imagining in a still moment, someone turning pensively toward the greening world, and that world somehow turning itself for the gaze of that face. And see now, here is that place. Those greens are here, deep with those blues. The air we breathe is sweetly fresh and warm, as though with berries. We are here. We are here. Set this down, too, as much as if an atrocity had happened and been seen. The earth is beautiful beyond all change. The earth is beautiful beyond all change. It's been a motif woven through the poems we looked at earlier and these poems in this final session. There's something about the pulsing energy of the world we've been given, the earth, in which we are a part of what we too blithely call nature, as if it's somehow beyond us. That we belong to that greening energy. No, that energy that Hildegard of Bingen referred to as the very nature of God, viriditas, the greening power of reality, of the earth, which is the very presence of God. The greening world that was there before us, that greens in and through us, and will go on greening beyond our death. That too is a mark of hope. We're going to turn for the next few minutes to the poet Kai Miller, and we'll hear him talk about, first of all, a book he published in 2010 called Light Song of Light. So let's hear Kai Miller describe this book, and then we'll turn to the poems. Ian?
And I guess in another way, I've only lived in Britain for what, six and a half years. So in another way, I very much was formed as a person and as a poet by the Caribbean. This collection is a light song of light, and as I was saying, it did come from a period when I thought things were pretty dark, and I wanted to know how could you. When things when things in life are that oppressive, are that dark, how can you sing a song of light in the midst of it? How can you dare to do that? Probably part of that came from dislocation. I'm from Jamaica, and as cynical as I think I am, I think the landscape of Britain is more cynical, I think. But also it asks you to mark your intelligence with cynicism, sometimes even with irony, that if you say something very deep that you believe in, you have to undercut it with irony immediately, and that proves that you're savvy, that you're smart, that you're kind of cutting edge. And I think I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write poems about light and not undercut it with irony, and say that this is intelligent. This is absolutely what I believe. That this is important. And so yeah, that's how it came about. But there are other things. That the economy crashed. My mother died. I was living in a new place. It was literally dark, and it was just how do you write light in the midst of all of this?
What a great interview. How do you write light in the midst of darkness? How do you consider the radiance when all you can see and feel and touch is despair, discouragement, depression? And Kai Miller in these poems is not at all sentimental. There's not a false moment in his writing that I've found, at least. So I'd like to turn with you to this book A light song of light. Here it is. And I'll give you all of these titles. I'll send a note out to all of you who've participated with the titles of the poems and the works they're from in the coming days. So here we are, a light song of light. First movement. A light song of light is not sung in the light. What would be the point? A light song of light swells up in dark times, in wolf time and knife time, in knuckle and blood times. It hums a small tune in daytime, but saves its full voice for the midnight. From the third poem. A light song of light occasionally stutters. Beautiful. Not constant. It's not a radiance that's full on all of the time. It occasionally stutters. This is par for the course. There is no need for concern, no need for bed rest or vitamins, no need to take your song into the song specialist for treatment. Number 4. But were you to take your light song in for a thorough checking up, a blood screening, you might discover your song has cancer, HIV, diabetes, is going blind in its left eye. You may not have strength to sing your song for this season or the next, but a light song of light cannot be held back. It cannot wait on health for its perfect occasion. The light song of light is not understood completely, not in the moment it is sung, and maybe not for months after. But it sings with a faith common in those who never lost their accents, who talk their talk knowing you may not catch everything, but phew, you will catch enough. And if you don't catch nothing, then something wrong with your ears. They've been tuned to the wrong frequency. Marvelous. You move now from a radiance in visual terms to a radiance in terms of a listening and a singing. And singing with a faith common in those who've stayed true to who they are, who haven't tried to learn to speak differently to fit in, who remain faithful to the gift of themselves they've been given, however small and insignificant and humble as it might be. And if you don't catch nothing, then something wrong with your ears. They've been tuned to the wrong frequency. An image of tuning to the right frequency. And here's the final poem. A light song of light says, thank you. The paper it's written on. This most solid evidence of its existence, however thin. Sometimes, though, a light song of light wishes it were written on material even thinner, a shaft of morning that slides through a shut window. The light song of light believes nothing is so substantial as light, and that light is unstoppable, and that light is all. Of all the creation stories we have in our vast collection of writings that spanned several thousand years in its making, none is more eloquent than the creation story lodged at the very beginning of John's Gospel. New Testament scholars will tell us it was probably a hymn written by some of the first followers of Jesus. A hymn that expressed their deepest belief, a hymn that wove its way back into the most ancient story, the beginning of the book we came to call Genesis. In the beginning, en arche in the Greek, the same first words that every Greek reader or speaker of the translation of the Hebrew Bible in the diaspora of Jesus' day would have known was the beginning of Genesis. And in that beginning, the first act, what is the first act of creation? But the separating of light and dark. And in that hymn, the crescendo that it reaches before the great claim that the Word has become flesh and dwells among us, is that claim that light is coming into the world. The world did not know it. But this light would never be overcome by the darkness. A light song of light believes nothing is so substantial as light, and that light is unstoppable, and that light is all. We're going to close with several poems from the Book of Mine, a collection of my poems, A Chance of Home, published in 2018. This first poem called Whether or Not. And these poems will bring us back to where we began. That our work in this life is, as Mary Oliver put it, to be saved into the beauty of what is, to be saved by the beauty of what is, and to be saved so that we might beautify this little corner of the earth that we inhabit, that you do, and I do. This poem is called Whether or Not. All along the days, I listen for them. These feathered carriers of song. They don't know why they sing. And when they do, don't think about who, if anyone, might be listening. Beauty is their way, as stillness is for stone and fragrance for the rose. All of this a wonder, whether or not we notice it or give it a name, whether or not it raises us to sing. whether or not it opens our hearts to wonder or to praise. It's about as clear a creed as I could offer at the close of this retreat, that we are made like the birds to sing in whatever ways we can. And when we do, perhaps we find the courage not to worry if no one's listening. Because beauty is their way and ours. All of this a wonder whether or not we notice it or give it a name, whether or not it raises us to sing, whether or not it opens our heart to wonder or to praise. And finally, I think that is what we're made for. We're fashioned to wonder about our lives. We're fashioned to imagine the radiance that we've each been offered. We're fashioned to carry that radiance forth to those around us who dwell in darkness. For it is to them that this great light is to rise. And finally, with Zagajewski and with Jesus and with the prophets through the ages, we're fashioned to praise, to bear testimony that this light is not mine or yours. It's ours. It's entrusted to us, this radiance. It's a gift, a birthright, given to us together, to bind us, to join us in communion. Well, the last poem isn't the one that you might, many of you, at least from the UK, might be thinking of if you look here at this beautiful image at Ullswater, perhaps on a day not unlike today. I know several of you are here from the Lake District somewhere. I remember visiting Ullswater with my father, who was a scholar, a teacher of literature, distinguished and celebrated. And we were standing in this place, and he began to recite from memory. Oh, he was of that generation. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering, dancing in the breeze. I've never forgotten that experience with my father, who passed a year ago now. There at Ullswater, the daffodils had long gone. We were there in July, but they were still there in his mind's eye. And as he recited this poem to us, they were there again. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Well, this final poem is not that one, but this was somehow in my mind as I wrote this poem, which will be our final poem of the retreat, entitled Still. It's a poem wondering about the radiance, considering the radiance as Ammons put it, searching for the radiance. And yes, it's a poem about a beauty, the beauty with which we were fashioned at the beginning, and the beauty that comes to refashion us, to resurrect us in the darkest moments of our darkest days. Still, they're still among us, the miracles, even when we no longer notice them in the clutter and clutch of our minds. They're still among us, the miracles, even when we no longer notice them in the clutter and clutch of our minds. You once asked me how we come to know them and when and why. I'm never quite sure, but surely not just on sun-drenched April mornings when the meadow gleams with daffodils and the wind is ripe with lilac and hyacinth. Then, of course, but also in seasons when we thirst for what we no longer have and long to taste and see again. And still they're close at hand, shining in this crazy lumpen world. And still they lure us with song, despite what we face of suffering, unshadowing the day and parading through the night, an inward kind of radiance that still might save us. And still they're close at hand. And still they lure us with song despite what we face of suffering, unshadowing the day and parading through the night, an inward kind of radiance that still might save us. Thank you for spending this day together. We do have some time. We have 15 minutes, staying on schedule, or on schedule, as you would say in the UK. And so I'd invite you, if you know how to use the chat function, there are some chats here. You could jot down a question or a comment, or if it's easiest, I think we have enough, we can manage this. If you go down to the reactions button, which is on the lower bar on the very right, and you click on that button, you'll see something that says raise hand. I'm going to do it myself. And you'll see in my little box, my hand is raised, so I go all the way up to the left-hand side to the top. So I'll see you, and you can unmute yourself and ask a question or reflect upon something that struck you or moved you this day. And I can lower my hand again. So let me welcome you after this day together to share. And Ben, I see you right off the bat. Ben Simpson.
Hi, Mark.
There we go. Thanks. The Book of Genesis by Kai Miller. From the book, There Is an Anger That Moves. Suppose there was a book full of the word let, L-E-T, let. Maybe just think about that for a moment. You know how that word works. At the beginning, the opening chapter of the book of Genesis. It's a marvelous word because if you realize the power of that word, God doesn't make things happen in the telling of the story. God says, let there be light. Let there be. Let there be. It's beautiful. It's an enabling. It's a way of saying, I bless this. I open myself to this. Suppose there was a book full only of the word let, from whose clipped sound all things began. Fur and firmament, feather, the first whale. Well, so far we're with the book of Genesis, right? In a way, that word brings everything into being as the story is told. And suppose we could scroll through its pages every day to find and pronounce a let meant only for us, only for you. A let meant only for you. We would stumble through the streets with open books, eyes crossed from too much reading. We would speak in auto-rhyme. The world would echo itself. And still we'd continue in rounds saying, let, and let, and let, until even silent dreams had been allowed. May that be a gift for you as you leave the retreat, to take that word let, meant only for you, and to keep saying that in your life, keep enabling that creation to happen in you, until even your silent dreams and the silent dreams those who are struggling around you had been allowed. I'll turn it back over to you, Anthony, and with thanks to all of you for a wonderful day together. Anthony?
Mark, thank you so much. I can see people turning aside from the electronic reactions and doing the physical clapping. Let's do the physical clapping. Mark can hear it in the States. So whether we're in Australia or the UK or on the East Coast, Mark, we thank you so much.
Thank you.
And just one or two things, everybody, if I may, you probably know what's coming. First of all, Mark, a huge thank you, a huge thank you. I was thinking of the verse of when the wise men visited Bethlehem, and just before we get to the gold, frankincense and myrrh, we hear that they opened their treasure chests. And I always quite like the idea that they then said, oh, how about some gold, frankincense and myrrh this time round? Who knows? Because there could have been so much in their treasure chests. Always at the wrapping up at the end of a conference or day, there's a sense of which bits is the wrapper up going to choose. There were so many treasures that I'm not even going to start because we would be here so long. But every poem and so many of the words and the pictures and the images and the word pictures you painted. So many times I was reaching to think I need to write that one down. You opened your treasures to us. And that's such a gift. And of course, always such a personal gift. One of your offhand phrases, which I loved, was something like an unexpected place to find a poet. But then, of course, what you showed us, it's in the unexpected places we find poetry and beauty all the way through. So, Mark, what a gift this has been. And we thank you so much. Also, thanks to dear Ben, who keeps and enables the vision, and it flourishes and it grows. And thank you, Ben, so much. And part of that is on the 10th of July, we've got Dr. Valentine Cunningham talking about D.H. Lawrence. And do go on the OCSG website for details of how to join in on that event, because that looks really good, 10th of July. Could I also, on our behalf, thank Ian McKenzie, who is our Zoom verger for this afternoon and handled it all so brilliantly. And you all, without knowing it, are so grateful that it was him and not me, because who knows what may have happened then. So Ian, we thank you. And Ben, we thank you. And Mark, we thank you so much. If I could just finish by rewriting one of my favorite hymns. We may know, O worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. This afternoon, I was thinking about, O worship the Lord in the holiness of beauty. And what you gave us, Mark, just to cause us to think and to love in that. And then maybe if I can use this verse as a closing prayer for us all. But before that, thank you all so much for joining us, for giving of yourselves this afternoon. Thank you. Fear not to enter his courts in the slenderness of the poor wealth thou wouldst reckon as thine, truth in its beauty and love in its tenderness. These are the offerings to lay on his shrine. The collect from evening prayer. Lighten our darkness, we beseech thee, O Lord, and by thy great mercy defend us from all perils and dangers of this night, for the love of thy only Son, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Amen.